This is Dr. Hamilton. Welcome to my video series on William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. In this video, I'd like to give you a general introduction to the play and discuss the opening scene. And specifically, I'd like to explain how the opening scene really reveals the play's backstory and introduces us to the central power players in the play and their conflict, and how that conflict then leads to the play's tragic climax. So, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar is about the most famous political assassination of all time. But at its core is a really personal story. It's the story about a high-minded, noble patrician, Brutus, who is swept up into the conspiracy against his best friend, Julius Caesar, and how he comes to murder that best friend. So, on this level, the themes of the story are human and personal: betrayal, tragic blindness, corruption, self-deception, and we will discuss those in the series of videos ahead. At the same time, Shakespeare wants to tell another story, and that is a story about the arc of history and politics. And in this story, we learn about the descent of Rome from being a republic governed by reasoned civic participation into really a dictatorship that is really characterized by a population that is enslaved by passion, by emotion, engulfed by emotion, consumed by emotion, and easily manipulated by a despot. So this transition from reason, a trait proper to a republic, to passion, a dangerous emotion, is easy for a dictator to manipulate, is the transition, the emotional transition of the play, and it will inflame virtually all of the characters by the play's end. Shakespeare understood very well that Julius Caesar's assassination marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the period of the emperors. So it ended the Republic and began one-person rule. So it's important for us to understand that the events described by Shakespeare in the play happened in 42 BC, and that this is 1650 years before the play was written, well over 2,000 years from our own time. So we need to be aware that we're reading a dramatization of Roman history from the standpoint of an Elizabethan playwright. So the events Shakespeare is describing from his time are like more than four times as far from Shakespeare in the past as Shakespeare is from us in the past. So we're really talking about a play that is written a long time ago about even more distant events in history. It's not some eternal account of a set of unchanging historical events. It's an interpretation of a historical event in Shakespeare's time. Shakespeare's key sources were Plutarch's The Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans, translated by Sir Thomas North in 1579. And this source in particular is really important and very illuminating to read. You can see how a lot of the content that Shakespeare got from the play is in this translation of Plutarch's Lives. And you can also see the things that Shakespeare subtly or even dramatically changed. So you can understand, you can almost see Shakespeare working as a playwright when you go back and read Plutarch. To a much lesser extent, Suetonius's The 12 Caesars is also important for the play. So as I've often said before in other videos, it is important to examine Shakespeare's openings. They often contain a wealth of information that's really important. And in this particular scene that opens up Julius Caesar, we see the entire political backstory open up for us. It will help us to understand, as I said, the conflicts between these power brokers that then will lead inevitably to Julius Caesar's assassination. So you really understand that there's a history behind Caesar's conflict with these other figures in Rome at the time, and you understand why the conflict exists, what has led to it. So since this is a play that is entitled Julius Caesar, and it's about one of the most famous people in history, we would expect maybe a different kind of opening. And I think it's important to kind of step back and ask ourselves, what kind of an opening would we expect, and then what kind of an opening do we get? We might expect something that shows the awesomeness of Caesar, the magnitude of this leader, right? That is not what Shakespeare gives us. What Shakespeare does, I think, is a consequence of not giving Caesar pride of place in this opening, is subtly undercut him. And we see that Shakespeare does this, and that's a pattern that I will explore in other videos in this series. What Shakespeare does is he zeroes in on the plebeians who are in the middle of a holiday, and they're sort of milling about, and they are accosted by these Roman tribunes, Flavius and Morellus, who yell at them right at the opening of the play. And so we're kind of thrown off. Why are these tribunes yelling at these plebeians? They scold them, "Hence home, you idle creatures! Get you home! Is this a holiday?" Flavius, one of the tribunes, is furious at these plebeians who are celebrating this holiday. And you have to understand that it's even more confusing because tribunes, their sworn duty is to defend the plebeians. So you would think that their interests would be aligned and they would not be yelling at them. But we gradually realize as the scene unfolds that they're actually concerned about them. Flavius is angry. They're celebrating. He wants to find out more about why they're celebrating. They're not supposed to be celebrating. He senses something's wrong here, that they're out on the streets. So after some irreverent answers from the kind of leader of the plebeians, a cobbler whose job it is to repair shoes, he reveals the true reason for the celebration. He says, "But indeed, sir, we make holiday to see Caesar and rejoice in his triumph." So what is a triumph? His triumph, Caesar's triumph, we might think is a military victory, a triumph of victory over an opponent, an enemy. But in Rome, triumphs were actual formal things. It's a parade, a military parade. A Roman general is granted. In order to be granted a triumph, you would have to have slaughtered 5,000 enemies. Caesar is granted a triumph, though, on very unusual terms. He's celebrating this triumph, and the terms of this triumph is not that he has vanquished Rome's enemies, but that he has vanquished another military general. This is a triumph from a civil war, a war against Rome itself. So this is not a situation where Rome's territory is being expanded, where they're getting foreign spoils, they're returning to the capital, it's making everybody wealthier, and so you would think that they would be celebrating. No. This is a civil war. Morellus declares, "Wherefore rejoice? What conquest brings Caesar home? What tributaries follow him to Rome to grace in captive bonds as chariot wheels?" So he hasn't brought home any conquests. He hasn't brought home any tributaries, which is money from tributes from the conquered countries. He's not making you wealthy. Why are you celebrating? It's like a blind, mindless celebration. This war, as Shakespeare's source Plutarch says, is a product of, quote, "the calamities of his own country." It was caused by Caesar's betrayal of a power-sharing agreement he had with Pompey that was duly worked through according to the terms of the Republic. 7 years earlier, Caesar started the war by marching on the capital, illegally crossing the Rubicon River, which was the boundary established around the area of the Roman capital, and he initiated a military coup against the Roman government. So this precipitated a war of 4 years between 45 and 49 BC with his former allies, the most important of which was Gnaeus Pompeius, known in English as Pompey. Caesar beat Pompey in Spain, and then at Pharsalus in Thessaly. Pompey then later fled to Egypt, where he was murdered by the Egyptian pharaoh's assassins. Caesar made a show that he was upset about this, and it's not clear he might have been, because he was well known for forgiving his enemies. But he also might have had they also might have had Caesar's tacit approval for this assassination. At any rate, Pompey is vanquished by Caesar, and the triumph is really over a military victory over Caesar's sons, who are still fighting with Caesar. The triumph is over a military victory against Pompey's sons, who were still engaged in a fight against Caesar. And so Morellus and Flavius in this scene, right at the start of the play, are lashing out at this public celebration of Caesar's triumph. They not only resent Caesar for what he's done, they're furious because the public doesn't seem to understand that Caesar's overthrown the Republic and is in the process of securing one-man rule, which would be the end of their rights, and the rights, of course, probably first and foremost in their mind, of the nobility, but also of the plebeians' ancestral rights of citizenship. I mean, the role of the tribunes is to defend the plebeians, but if you have an autocrat, the tribunes no longer have any role in defending the plebeians, right? It's just whatever the autocrat says. And so here they're sort of dancing away their own rights and blindly worshiping this guy who's trying to attain one-man rule, who hasn't brought them anything in exchange. They're losing their republic. And so it might help to just take a second to talk about the meaning of the word republic. It's not a word that Shakespeare uses, but it's an important word nonetheless, because that is the type of government that the Romans had, and Shakespeare well understood that this is the type of government that Rome had at this time. Republic literally means, comes from the Latin res publica, which literally means the public thing. What it suggests is a notion that everybody has a public concern, a concern for the governing of the country. It doesn't imply that everybody has an equal right or an equal share in ruling the country, or an equal voice in ruling the country, but everybody has a concern. Everybody's involved in ruling the country, not ruled by one person. And Shakespeare, although he doesn't use that word, he certainly dramatizes this conflict between a slavish and servile situation where you have one person ruling over you, and a country where you have freedom and self-determination. So Brutus, for example, who is fighting for the Republic, says in his speech at Julius Caesar's funeral, "Had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves than Caesar were dead to live all free men?" And certainly he means here that if Caesar rises to autocratic rule, he will take away your rights of representation in the Senate. You will no longer have a say. Would you rather die slaves or live as free men? So Brutus is saying that Caesar's ambition to become a dictator is going to actively deprive them of those rights that they have. It will be the end of the republic. That is what is at stake here. That is what Morellus and Flavius are fighting for. So it's with this in mind that we might think of Morellus's lines here to the plebeians. He says, "You blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless things. Oh, you hard hearts, you cruel men of Rome, knew you not Pompey?" So he's saying essentially that they're senseless. They're like drugged, stoned, so to speak. You hard hearts, you cruel men of Rome, by their worship of this guy. What are you doing? He's saying. So once again, when Brutus will give that funeral speech, he tells the public, he says, "Awake your senses, that you may the better judge that what I'm saying to you. What's on the line is your republic. Awake your senses." They're senseless. They're sort of drugged into a stupor. So Shakespeare implies that even in this very first scene, they seem to have lost the capacity to judge. Awake your senses so that you may be the better judge. They've lost their capacity to judge, to reason. Why would you celebrate a civil war? Why would you celebrate the country cannibalizing itself? That's not something to celebrate. It's not making you wealthier. The country's imploding against itself. He's killed 5,000 Romans? That's something to celebrate? No, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't follow. It is irrational. So Morellus goes on to describe how they used to shout, in celebration of Pompey, but as a leader. But Pompey was a leader from Morellus and Flavius's point of view for the republic, not just as an autocratic leader. And he says, "And now do you cull out a holiday? Now do you strew flowers in his way that comes in triumph over Pompey's blood?" Pompey's blood meaning his sons. At this point, it's, as I said, the war is going on with Pompey's sons, but also Pompey's blood, his murder. And so there are lots of uses of this word blood in the play. I think this is the first one. It will be repeated. This is the first blood. The first blood shed by Julius Caesar that will initiate the anger of the nobles and lead to Julius Caesar's assassination. So, Morellus is suggesting, that certainly with the imagery here, that Caesar has blood on his hands, not a god to be worshipped. So this comparison between Caesar and Pompey should remind those of you who have read Hamlet of Prince Hamlet's comparison between Claudius, his uncle, and his father, who's been killed by Claudius, his uncle, in the famous closet scene with Gertrude, his mother, where he compares his father to the god of light, Hyperion, and his uncle to a satyr, to somebody consumed by vices, a half man, half goat. And this is the kind of intensity of this comparison. So Hamlet also, he advises his mother to pray for forgiveness. Morellus tells the plebeians, "Fall upon your knees and pray so that the gods don't bring the plague for your ingratitude. Pray that the gods don't bring a plague because of your ingratitude towards Pompey." And so it's also the fact that he's infuriated, they cannot discern the difference between a tyrant, in their view, who's going to enslave them, and a noble Roman who is going to honor their their rights as citizens and their status as reasoned participants in the Republic. So after the plebeians are sent home, Flavius orders Julius Caesar's statues to be disrobed. This is very important. He's trying to cut Caesar down to size, and in the triumph, all of these statues have laurel crowns and symbols of Caesar's authority, and so he wants to go out there and remove all these symbols of Caesar's authority. He wants to clip Caesar's wings. He says that he wants to pluck these growing feathers from Caesar's wing. And Caesar's compared to a falcon, a bird of prey, who's soaring above the view of men before he potentially swoops down, right, to kill them one by one. Well, we'll later hear that this bird of prey does strike. Casca in Act 1, Scene 2 will tell the conspirators. He actually will later become one of the conspirators. He tells them, he reports to them that Morellus and Flavius, for pulling scarves off of Caesar's images, are put to silence. So in other words, Caesar's had them murdered, right? And so the threat that Caesar poses is not just it's not just a historical conflict between the nobles and Caesar. Caesar is acting on this as you know, those who criticize him are put to silence. So this is quite a real threat here that is developing from Caesar. So once again, we have right here at the start of the play, not a scene that elevates the myth of Caesar, right? Although it does allude to Caesar and his power and what he's done. But it's one that questions the legitimacy of Caesar as a ruler from the point of view of his political rivals. And so, you know, a lot of the sort of stereotype I think about Shakespeare, the sort of crude stereotype about Shakespeare is, oh, he wrote about all those kings and rulers and stuff, so he must just be slavishly devoted to them. Well, right here at the beginning, he's questioning the legitimacy of the central figure and framing that from the point of view of the people that assassinate him. So this is not exactly slavish devotion to power here. We see introduced here the nobles who were aggrieved at Julius Caesar's betrayal of Pompey, and Caesar, who has already acquired the love of the plebeians. And we see the tribunes who are worried about Caesar seizing autocratic power. When Caesar is murdered, his bleeding body will be placed at the base of Pompey's statue. So Pompey will triumph, symbolically anyway. And this is straight from Plutarch. This is not something that Shakespeare just added. This is straight from Plutarch, at the base of Pompey's statue. So Pompey will have his revenge on Caesar. He will lie at the feet, figuratively, of the general he has betrayed. The central conspirators in the play that we will get into exploring the characters of Cassius and Brutus, the central figures in the conspiracy. They are from the patrician class represented by Morellus and Flavius in this scene. And as now we understand why they have reason to resent Caesar's rise to power and why there is such consternation about Caesar's rise to power. It's not just that this guy is somebody that they all envy. His power derives from a coup, a military coup, against Rome itself. And so, I mean, it should be perfectly understandable why it's easy for the conspirators to persuade Brutus to become a part of the conspiracy and to participate in the assassination, because he has such an identification with the grievance of the conspirators, with their sense that Rome has been attacked, the Roman Republic has been attacked by Caesar. He marched on the Capitol. And so also, Brutus is himself kind of a symbol of the cause of the conspiracy. He's a living symbol of the cause of the conspiracy. He's named after his ancestor, who was named Lucius Junius Brutus, who is the traditional founder of the Roman Republic, because he was the one credited for driving out Tarquinius Superbus, traditionally regarded as the tyrant who was the last king of Rome. And so Brutus, in his very name, symbolizes the Republic. And he's actually called the soul of Rome because he embodies the principles of Rome, but also the history of Rome and the Republic. And so he seems to be a living embodiment of the Republic and a protector of the Republic based upon his name. There's actually a brass statue of Brutus's ancestor prominently featured in the Capitol to remind Brutus of this proud tradition of his namesake. And so this group of conspirators will be allied against Julius Caesar. Once Julius Caesar is murdered, then Mark Antony will take up Julius Caesar's cause, and Octavius, who will later call himself Octavius Caesar. Octavius is Julius Caesar's grand nephew, and so inherits the mantle of Caesar. He will take on that name of Caesar from Julius Caesar. And so after Caesar's assassination, Brutus is going to represent really the last stand of the Roman Republic and the reasoned civic participation that it represents against Mark Antony, who will be associated with the passion that he incites in the funeral speech and then engulfs the population, ushering in the reign of emperors, beginning with Octavius, who will call himself Caesar, and he will be the first, and he will reign for decades as the first emperor of the Roman Republic. So right at the start here, we see the central fault lines of the play's conflicts. Caesar aspiring towards autocratic power, the patricians who oppose him and want to uphold the Roman Republic. And we see the plebeians right at the very beginning, we're introduced to them, who seem to be in this state of senselessness, unable anymore to understand their own rights and freedoms, and literally being screamed at by the tribunes to wake up. They will not wake up. Rome will become engulfed in passion and in flames. It will erupt again into a civil war, and the outcome of that civil war will be the rise of the emperors. So with that, thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.